Snow does not belong underground, and yet it fell. It came through the fissures first, thin white threads unspooling from cracks in the vaulted ceiling 160 meters above the floor. Then through the collapsed sections of Dome 7, where 3 million tons of reinforced concrete had buckled inward like a crushed tin can, leaving a wound in the ceiling wide enough to park a cargo plane. The snow spiraled down through that wound in lazy, indifferent curtains, catching the dim phosphorescent glow of the emergency strip still flickering along the lower walls, and landed without a sound on streets that had not known sunlight in 11 years. This was Failhaven, or what remained of it. The briefing files called it URM-04, Underground Residential and Military Complex, Sector 4. Analysts called it a failed experiment. The soldiers who had operated in its surface districts before the collapse called it a graveyard with good infrastructure. The people who built it, the architects, the engineers, the federal planners who had sold Congress on the idea of a self-sustaining subterranean city capable of housing 300,000 people in the event of nuclear exchange, called it nothing anymore, because most of them were dead. Failhaven had been designed in the late 2030s during the Second Great Proliferation Panic. The concept was elegant in theory: bore into the granite shelf beneath the existing metropolitan grid, construct modular residential domes at staggered depths, run transit arteries between them like the spokes of a wheel, and give the whole structure its own water recycling, power generation, and agricultural capacity. It was the ultimate bunker, not a military installation, a city, self-contained, survivable. What the planners had not accounted for was what happens when a structure of that scale is abandoned in a hurry. The evacuation order came in 2041 after the seismic event that cracked Dome 3 and flooded 2 of the 4 primary transit tubes. The official death toll was 412. The real number was higher. The city was sealed, condemned, and classified, its coordinates redacted from federal construction databases, its very existence reduced to a footnote in a DARPA appropriations dispute that nobody followed closely enough to care about. For 6 years, Failhaven sat empty and silent. The emergency lighting ran on its own fuel cells, cycling through dim amber intervals like a slow heartbeat. Water dripped, concrete settled, snow found its way in through the wounds the seismic event had opened. Then, 3 years ago, someone moved back in. Not settlers, not survivors, not squatters in any conventional sense. The team that moved into Failhaven in the spring of 2047 had weapons, communications equipment, server infrastructure, and enough food for 18 months. They occupied the intact portions of Domes 5 and 6, the deepest sections, the ones the seismic crack had not touched, and they brought with them something the original planners had never imagined: a purpose. Chief Petty Officer Garrett Holloway did not know any of this when his team descended into the access shaft at 0214 hours. He knew the mission parameters. He knew the target. He knew that a man named Dr. Felix Wren, computational systems architect, formerly of DARPA's Autonomous Threat Assessment Division, was being held somewhere in the lower domes, and that what was inside Dr. Wren's head could not be allowed to transfer to anyone else. He knew his team, 7 operators, all from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, men he had trained with, bled with, trusted without reservation. He knew they had 6 hours before the extraction window closed. What Holloway did not know, what no amount of satellite imagery or drone reconnaissance could have told him, was how completely Failhaven would feel like something that had already decided to kill them. The access shaft descended at a 20-degree angle for 40 meters, then opened into a maintenance corridor that had once connected the freight loading bays. Holloway went first, then Petty Officer Second Class Dylan Reese, then the rest of the team in practice sequence. They moved in total darkness except for the pale green wash of their night optics, and the cold hit them almost immediately, not the manageable cold of an unheated building, but a specific, damp underground cold that seemed to come from the rock itself, from the granite that surrounded them on all sides, that had been sitting at a constant 41 degrees Fahrenheit for 11 years, and did not care at all about the warmth of human bodies passing through it. The corridor opened after 60 meters into what the maps, 11-year-old construction schematics that NavSpec War had obtained through a contractor dispute, labeled as Freight Staging Area 7C. The room was cavernous. Holloway's night optics resolved it in overlapping shades of green. High vaulted ceiling, industrial shelving systems still bolted to the walls, abandoned transport pallets stacked in unsteady columns, and above it all, through a collapsed section of the ceiling, the impossible sight of snow falling straight down. Slow, indifferent. Reese touched Holloway's shoulder and said nothing. He did not need to. They both looked up for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away and kept moving. The city opened around them gradually, the way a sentence becomes a paragraph. First the corridor, then the staging area, then a transit artery, one of the original tube systems, the rails still visible beneath a thin layer of mineral deposits and dust, and then, at the far end of the artery, the first dome, Dome 5. Holloway stopped at the artery entrance and did a visual sweep. The dome was a structure roughly 400 meters in diameter, its ceiling at the apex 60 meters above the floor. Along its interior walls, residential modules had been stacked 6 and 7 levels high, connected by external stairways and walkways that were still mostly intact. The streets at the dome's base were wide, designed for emergency vehicle access, and they curved away from the transit artery entrance in both directions, disappearing behind the residential stacks into shadow. The phosphorescent emergency strips still glowed along the lower walls, pale amber, barely enough to navigate by without optics. There was no sign of movement. That, Holloway would later reflect, should have been the first warning. Not the cold, not the snow, the stillness. Valehaven was too quiet for a place that had people living in it. The signal that led them in was clean. That was the thing Holloway kept returning to in the 40 seconds between the moment everything went wrong and the moment his brain caught up to what his training already knew. The signal had been clean, not just functional clean, properly modulated, correctly encrypted, using the right authentication handshakes for Dr. Felix Wren's assigned emergency transmitter, the kind of signal that said, "I am a professional who is where the intelligence reports say I should be." The kind of signal that someone else had composed very carefully. They were at the base of Dome 5's residential stack grid position Whiskey 3 on the schematic, a corridor junction where 3 walkway access points converged above a small plaza when Holloway registered the change. Not a sound, a texture. The quality of the silence shifted. The way a room sounds different when it contains people who are holding their breath. He was opening his mouth to call a halt when the lights came on. Not emergency strips. Floodlights. 6 of them, recessed into the upper walkways, angled down at approximately 45 degrees. They hit the plaza with the sudden, total certainty of a verdict, and in the half-second before his optics adjusted, Holloway saw the figures, 12, possibly 14, positioned along the walkways above them with firing angles that covered every exit from the plaza. Contact high restarted. The first shots came before he finished the word. What followed was the compressed, non-linear chaos of an ambush that has been professionally designed. Movement and noise, and the specific cognitive overload of trying to process threat vectors from multiple elevations simultaneously while your body is already moving on instinct, already finding the nearest cover, already returning fire on a target that is above you, and behind partial concealment, while another target is moving to your left and the team frequency is filling with voices, and at least one of those voices is saying something you don't want it to say. Holloway made it to the base of the residential stack, a concrete pillar broad enough to cover his torso, and got his first real assessment. 2 of his team were down. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb, 5 years with the team, 3 deployments, married, 2 daughters in Chesapeake, Virginia, was down in the center of the plaza, and not moving. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Aldridge was against the far wall, moving but dragging his right leg, being helped by Senior Chief Aaron Pruitt. The remaining 4, Holloway, Reese, Petty Officer First Class Connor Shields, and Chief Petty Officer Len Harwick had cover. Temporary, the positions above them were raking the plaza with controlled bursts, not the suppressive saturation of an undisciplined force, but the methodical, patient fire of people who understood geometry. Drones? Reese said, close to Holloway's ear. Holloway was already trying. His tablet showed the drone relay interface, 2 Switchblade, 300 units in standby, and both units were returning the same error code. Magnetic interference, GPS degraded, navigation unavailable. He had known about the magnetic anomaly. It was in the briefing. What the briefing had not fully communicated was that GPS degraded meant completely non-functional at depth, and that the anomaly extended throughout the dome system, not just in the deeper levels. The drones were useless. Harwick, Holloway said. West exit. Covered, Harwick said. 2 shooters, upper walkway, staggered. North? Covered. 1, maybe 2. East brought us in. They're not covering east to keep us from running. Because east goes deeper, Reese said. Because east goes deeper, Holloway confirmed. He understood the shape of it now. The signal Dr. Wren's signal had originated from grid position Echo 7, which was in Dome 6, which was east through a single transit artery that funneled into a choke point at the dome boundary. If they moved east, they moved through a bottleneck with shooters behind them and an unknown ahead. If they held here, they burned ammunition against elevated positions they couldn't reach. If they tried either the north or west exits, they took fire from multiple angles in the open. The trap was not designed to kill them immediately. It was designed to exhaust them. Holloway looked at Marcus Webb's body in the center of the plaza. The snow was still coming down through the ceiling wound somewhere above Dome 5, and a few stray flakes had found their way this far in, drifting past the harsh white floodlights, landing on the concrete near Webb's outstretched hand. "Radio," he said. "Still nothing," Shields said. "Try every frequency. Beacon, tactical, emergency, everything. I've been, everything." Connor, the electromagnetic interference in Valehaven was not accidental. Holloway did not know this yet, but it was the second layer of the trap, a set of low-frequency emitters positioned throughout the dome system that didn't block radio transmission entirely, but degraded it into something useless. Not silence, which would have been cleaner, static, white noise with occasional fragments of coherent signal embedded in it, enough to make you keep trying, keep rotating frequencies, keep hoping. They held the pillar position for 11 minutes. Aldridge's leg wound was through and through, a clean penetration of the lateral calf muscle, painful, functional for now, not immediately life-threatening. Pruitt had packed it, and Aldridge was upright. Webb was not recoverable. The enemy positions on the walkways maintained their spacing but did not press, which told Holloway they were waiting for something, reinforcements coming from another direction, or simply waiting for the team to make a decision. Ammunition count. Holloway had 4 magazines remaining for his HK, 416 and 1 for his sidearm. Reese was at 3 and 1, Shields was at 2 and 2, Harwick was at 3 and 1. Pruitt had 3 and 2 but was managing Aldridge. The team's combined ammunition, if they committed to a breach of the western or northern exits, would not last through the engagement. Shields was cycling through frequencies mechanically, the way a man does when he has stopped expecting results but needs the motion of trying. Tactical 1 through 6. Command, emergency, relay, beacon, start again. On the 43rd cycle, Holloway would remember the exact number because he was watching Shields paused. "Wait." Holloway looked. The frequency display showed 143.625 megahertzes, a channel so far outside standard operational use that it was listed in the reference tables as Legacy Emergency Civil Defense Era, discontinued. The kind of frequency that appeared on lists specifically so that people would know not to use it. The signal on that frequency was not strong. It was barely there, a carrier wave with modulation so light that the interference almost swallowed it completely. But Shields had good ears and experience, and he had the squelch set low enough to catch it. He handed Holloway the handset. Holloway put it to his ear. "Silence." Then, "Anyone receiving on this channel, please respond with your current grid position. I have a firing solution in preparation, but I need confirmation of target coordinates before I can proceed." A woman's voice. Calm. Not the calm of someone performing calmness, the specific flat, technical calm of someone who is doing something that requires all of her attention and is spending zero cognitive resources on anything else. Holloway looked at Reese. Reese's expression said, "I don't know either. Answer it." "This is Chief Petty Officer Garrett Holloway, Naval Special Warfare. Identify yourself." A pause of approximately 4 seconds. "I don't have a designation you'd recognize from official channels. You can use the call sign Pale Echo. I've been monitoring the dome system for approximately 16 hours. I counted 14 personnel moving into position over the past 6 hours. You have 11 active shooters remaining. The 3 on the east walkway moved to reinforce the western approach approximately 4 minutes ago, which means your east corridor is currently clear for a window of roughly 8 to 12 minutes. But I don't recommend using that window." Holloway processed this. Why not? Because the problem isn't getting out. The problem is that if you leave, you don't complete your mission, and whatever Dr. Wren is carrying leaves with the people who currently have him. I have a solution that addresses both problems simultaneously. But I need target coordinates and I need you to give me 10 minutes. Another pause. Holloway was aware of the absurdity of what he was about to ask, aware of exactly how little basis he had for trusting a voice on a dead frequency in an abandoned city where his intelligence had already been manipulated once. He asked anyway, "What kind of solution?" "A single shot," Pale Echo said. From my current position to the primary command node at grid position Delta 1, that's the upper command platform on the Dome 5 East walkway. Your operational intelligence may have it listed as a maintenance station. It's not. It's a fire control hub. If the commander at Delta 1 goes down, you lose coordinated fire discipline on every other position simultaneously. They're not professionals in the conventional sense. They're effective because they're being directed. Remove the direction, and you have 14 individuals in separated positions without command coherence. Your current position, Holloway said. And what is your current position? Another pause. This one longer. Approximately 4,200 yards from Delta 1. The handset went quiet. Holloway stared at the wall in front of him. Connor Shields was watching him with an expression that suggested he had heard enough of the conversation to form an opinion, and his opinion was visible on his face. Chief, Shields said quietly. I know, Holloway said. Her name, before she became Pale Echo, was Sergeant First Class Lenora Vass. Or it had been. Before the discharge. Before the investigation that went nowhere. Before the 2 years of contract work and the slow, deliberate process of becoming exactly difficult enough to find that she might as well not exist. She had qualified for the sniper program at Fort Benning in 2038, the same year the Army made the qualification process formally gender-neutral rather than functionally gender-neutral, which is a distinction that matters if you're paying attention. She had shot the qualification course clean, not just passed, but posted scores that the range instructors spent 3 days arguing about before concluding that the data was accurate. The argument had nothing to do with whether she could shoot. Nobody disputed whether she could shoot. The argument was about method. Lenora Vass did not use the standard computational aids. She did not run the atmospheric calculation software on the integrated targeting system. She did not consult the wind data from the range sensors. She loaded her rifle, looked at the targets, waited, and fired, consistently, at ranges that made the standard computational aids feel, in retrospect, like training wheels she had never needed. The range instructors specifically, Staff Sergeant Roy Callender and Warrant Officer Diane Merritt, wrote up 2 separate evaluations. Callender's evaluation said she was exceptional and recommended her for advanced placement. Merritt's evaluation said her method was unverifiable and therefore operationally unreliable, because if her performance depended on an intuitive process she couldn't explain or teach, then her performance could not be quality controlled. Merritt's argument was, from a strictly institutional perspective, not unreasonable. The Army trains systems, not individuals. What cannot be replicated cannot be relied upon at scale. What Merritt's evaluation did not account for was that operational sniping is, by definition, not a scalable activity. Vass had served 4 years in the program, 3 deployments, 11 confirmed shots at ranges above 800 yards, 0 misses before the incident with Major Harold Fitch. Fitch had pulled her off a confirmed shot during an operation in the Anatolian deployment zone because he did not believe a woman operating without a spotter could have verified her range calculation independently. He had called for a hold, the target had moved, the operation had failed to achieve its primary objective, and Fitch had written an after-action report that described his decision as prudent given the unverifiable nature of the shooter's methodology. Vass had filed a formal rebuttal. The rebuttal had been reviewed, archived, and not acted upon. She had resigned rather than be reassigned. That had been 5 years ago. In the intervening time, Lenora Vass had done what people with exceptional and unemployable skills tend to do. She had found employment in spaces that had no formal HR processes, operated in domains that did not require institutional verification of methodology, and developed a reputation in very small circles for being precisely as reliable as her record suggested she was. She had found Valehaven through a contractor intelligence network she didn't discuss, had entered through a surface access point that didn't appear on the official schematics because it had been added during a Phase 3 construction modification that predated the final filing, and had spent 16 hours mapping the dome system's acoustics and magnetic interference patterns before the SEAL team descended. She had not known they were coming. She had come for a different reason entirely, one she intended to conclude after this was over, if everything went as she planned. Right now, she was lying prone on the remnants of a freight elevator platform that had partially collapsed but held just barely, at a 40-meter elevation inside the transit artery system, and she was looking at a distance of 4,200 yards through a scope that had no electronic components, because electronic components did not function reliably in Valehaven's magnetic field. She had a rifle, a Cadix CDX 50 Tremor, chambered in, 50 BMG, 6 years old, modified by hand over the course of 4 years until there was almost nothing left of the original factory configuration except the receiver. It was heavy, it was stable. It was hers in the way that things become yours when you have spent more time with them than with most people you know. She had 1 round already in the chamber. She had 4 more in the magazine and 3 loose in her left breast pocket, loaded specifically for this dome system's internal atmospheric conditions, which were not standard. She did not need 4 more. She did not need 3 loose. She needed 1. The shot was not impossible. Lenora Vass had thought through the phrase impossible shot and decided it was a category error. Shots were difficult or they were not difficult. They were within or outside the physical parameters of the round, the weapon, and the conditions. 4,200 yards was, by any conventional standard, beyond the reliable engagement envelope for even a 50 BMG under ideal conditions. Valehaven was not ideal conditions. The dome system created what fluid dynamics engineers would have called a complex advection pattern, layered air currents moving at different velocities and temperatures through the interconnected spaces. The transit arteries acted as pressure channels, accelerating airflow between the domes. The collapsed ceiling sections created unpredictable updrafts where the outside atmosphere bled in. The emergency lighting systems produced localized thermal gradients near the walls. In the open air, a sniper reads wind by looking at vegetation, at dust, at water surfaces, at the behavior of light itself passing through layers of differing density. In Valehaven, the wind did not follow rules that a standard field manual could describe. It moved in 3 dimensions simultaneously. It changed direction not because of weather systems or terrain features, but because of the specific geometry of a ruined underground city with 17 major structural failures and 400 meters of interconnected space. Vass had spent most of her 16 hours in the dome system learning to read it. She had lit small paper fragments 3 centimeters square, thin enough to respond to air movement at 43 locations throughout the transit arteries and watched how they moved. She had noted the patterns. She had built, in her head, a 3-dimensional model of the airflow that was as different from any conventional ballistic environment as a wind tunnel is different from open sky. She understood Valehaven's air the way a musician understands a difficult room. Not through calculation, through listening. The shot from her position to grid position Delta 1, the command platform on Dome 5's east walkway, was not a straight line. The transit artery system didn't allow straight lines. The round would travel approximately 900 yards through the main transit artery, then enter Dome 6 through the boundary aperture, a collapsed section of the artery wall that created a 30-meter opening, then cross Dome 6's diameter of 400 meters, then enter the transit artery between Dome 6 and Dome 5, then, and this was the critical complication, travel through a section of artery where a partial ceiling collapse had created a wind funnel that would push the round approximately 14 centimeters to the left if she did not account for it, then enter Dome 5 through the east boundary, then travel the remaining distance to Delta 1. The bullet would pass through 7 distinct atmospheric zones, each with different temperature, humidity, and airflow characteristics. It would do all of this at a velocity that started at approximately 850 meters per second and would bleed off at a rate determined by the air resistance in each successive zone. And she had no computer, no spotter, no atmospheric sensors, no rangefinder with atmospheric compensation algorithms. She had her eyes, her experience, and 11 years of thinking about how a shot like this would work if she ever needed to take it. She had thought about this shot, not this specific shot, but shots of this character every day for 11 years. She keyed the radio one more time. The signal was degrading. She had perhaps 90 seconds of functional communication remaining. "Chief Holloway," she said, "I need a decision in 60 seconds. After that, the interference cycle in this section resets and I lose the channel." Holloway's training had prepared him for many things. It had prepared him for physical exhaustion and the specific cognitive degradation that comes with it. It had prepared him for the death of teammates, not emotionally, because nothing prepares you emotionally for that, but operationally, for the need to continue functioning after it happens. It had prepared him for compromised intelligence, for missions that deviated from plan, for the moment when the contingency fails and there is no further contingency. It had not prepared him, precisely, for this. Not because the situation was beyond the framework of his experience. He had been in ambushes before, had been in positions where external support was the only option, had made calls on partial information under fire. All of that was familiar. What was unfamiliar was the specific texture of trusting something he could not evaluate. Every asset he had relied on in his career, every piece of support, every intelligence report, every cooperative element had come with some form of institutional backing. A chain of command, a verification process, a reason to believe that the person or system he was relying on had been tested, credentialed, and found reliable by people whose reliability he already trusted. Hail Echo was a voice on a dead frequency in a city that should not exist. She had given him accurate intelligence about the movement of 3 shooters from the East Walkway, a detail he had no way to verify until he did, briefly, when Reese made a controlled advance to the artery entrance and confirmed that the East Walkway positions were indeed empty. She had accurate grid knowledge of a site that appeared on no current issue documentation his team carried. She had, by her own account, been here for 16 hours and spent that time doing exactly the kind of systematic environmental analysis that a serious professional would do. And she was asking him to hold his position, to not move, to not attempt the East Corridor window, to not do the thing that his instincts and training were telling him to do, and trust a shot from 4,200 yards in the dark. Reese crouched beside him. "Chief, tell me something useful." She knew about the 3-man movement on the East Walkway. That's not guesswork. Could be part of the same operation that set the trap. Could be. But why would they tip us to a clear corridor and then offer a shot that helps us if she's on their side? Holloway looked at the ceiling. A few snowflakes. Slow and cold and entirely indifferent. "Harwick," he said. "Chief, if she misses, if nothing changes after the shot, how long can we hold this position?" Harwick did the arithmetic without hesitation. 7 minutes at current rates. Less if they decide to press. 7 minutes. Holloway keyed the radio. "Hail Echo. I need 2 things. First, Delta 1. Describe the target to me. 4 seconds. Male. Approximately 50 years old. Distinctive gray thermal jacket. Operating from a folding command station on the upper walkway. He's been stationary for 11 minutes. He has a handset in his right hand and he's been issuing instruction in approximately 90-second intervals. He's not holding a weapon." Holloway processed this. The description of a non-armed command operator, not a shooter but a director, matched his assessment of how the ambush had been coordinated. It required that level of dedicated command attention. "Second thing, tell me how you're going to take the shot." A long pause. "Longer than the others. I'm going to tell the bullet where the wind is going to be," Pale Echo said. "Not where it is now." "Silence. Hold your position," she said. "Tell your team to keep their heads down for the next 45 seconds after I call shot taken. Do not move until you hear the follow-on." The radio dissolved into static. Holloway looked at Reese. Reese looked at him. "Stay low," Holloway said to his team. 45 seconds after she calls it. Nobody moves. He did not say, "I believe this will work." He did not say, "She knows what she's doing." He did not say anything that would require him to put his conviction into words, because he was not entirely certain he had conviction. He had a decision. That was enough. The freight elevator platform had a sway. It was subtle, a micro-movement, barely perceptible, the settling of a structure that had been hanging from compromised cable attachments for 11 years, but Lenora Vass had known about it for 6 hours. She had mapped it. It was a 1.3-second oscillation. The platform completing one full microcycle of forward and backward movement in 1.3 seconds, consistent, metronome precise. She had timed her dry fire practice cycles to it. The platform's forward position, the end of the forward swing, was her shot window. At that exact point, the platform's movement stopped for 0.2 seconds before the backward swing began. 0.2 seconds was a long time if you had already done everything else. She had already done everything else. She had set the rifle on its bipod. She had adjusted the bipod's forward cant by 0.8 degrees to account for the platform's angle. She had confirmed her cheek weld 4 times, each time ensuring that the scope's sight picture was identical, no parallax error, no canting, no deviation in her eye position relative to the optical axis. She had run the complete ballistic scenario in her mind 9 times, each time making small corrections as her understanding of the dome system's air patterns sharpened. She was not thinking anymore. Thinking was the preparation. Preparation was finished. What remained was her body, the rifle, the round in the chamber, and the space between her and Delta 1. The Valehaven wind was doing what she had predicted, moving in the transit artery at approximately 12 kilometers per hour with a left-to-right component that would become a right-to-left component in Dome 6's interior before settling into a crosswind in the final artery section. The funnel collapse section, the one that would push the round 14 centimeters left if unaccounted for, was currently in the upswing phase of its convection cycle, which meant the push would be slightly less than 14 centimeters. She had revised it to 11. These were not calculations she had written down. They were a picture, a complete, spatial picture of where the air was and where it was going to be. She keyed the radio one final time. The signal was almost gone. "Shot taken," she said. She put the handset aside. The platform was at the midpoint of its backward swing. She let it complete the swing, felt the deceleration, the pause, the forward acceleration beginning. She breathed out slowly, completely, the last quarter of her breath, the way she had been taught, and then forgotten, and then relearned in her own way. The platform reached the forward position. The 0.2 second window opened. She pressed the trigger. There is no drama in the bullet itself. A 50 BMG projectile does not know where it is going. It does not account for distance or atmospheric complexity or the lives that depend on it. It is a 660 grain metal cylinder with a copper jacket and a lead core, and it follows physics. At the muzzle, it was traveling at 852 meters per second. In the first transit artery, it encountered air moving at roughly equivalent speed in the opposite direction relative to its trajectory, which created a drag coefficient that bled approximately 14 meters per second from its velocity over the 900 yards of artery. The air in the artery was 3 degrees colder than the ambient surface temperature and had a humidity level of 71%. The round's trajectory deviated 0.4 centimeters to the left from the baseline, consistent with the artery's crossflow pattern. It entered Dome 6 through the boundary aperture at 811 meters per second. Dome 6's interior was the largest open space in the route. 400 meters of dome interior where the air was relatively still except for the thermal gradient along the eastern wall, a slow, rising column of warmer air created by a power conduit that had been running continuously for 6 years, heating the rock behind the wall, the rock heating the air touching it. The round passed through the outer edge of this column at approximately the 40-meter mark in Dome 6. The thermal gradient pushed it 0.6 centimeters to the right less than Vass had expected, which meant the column had been weakening. She had accounted for that possibility in the higher-order revision of her picture. Cross Dome 6, through the far boundary, into the second transit artery, the funnel collapse section, the convection upswing, the 11-centimeter left push, accounted for in the firing solution by a 0.3 degree right cant built into the shot. The round tracked slightly right of center as it entered Dome 5's east boundary. It was traveling at 741 meters per second. At that velocity, at that range, the round was still supersonic. It was still stable. The gyroscopic stabilization, imparted by the rifle's rifling, had decayed to approximately 61% of its muzzle value, which was within the functional stability threshold for the projectile's geometry. The man at grid position Delta 1, the man in the gray thermal jacket with the handset in his right hand, was looking at the north walkway when the round found him. He had been looking at the north walkway because a subordinate there had requested clarification on a fire control instruction, and he had turned his head slightly to the right to give the instruction. The slight head turn changed the point of impact by roughly 3 centimeters. It did not change the outcome. The sound reached the plaza approximately 12.2 seconds after the shot. Not the shot itself, the shot was too far away, the sound absorbed and scattered by the dome system's geometry. What reached them was the secondary effect. A single sharp impact, the specific acoustic signature of something heavy falling onto metal grating from a height of approximately 4 meters, followed immediately by the sounds of alarm, not gunfire, not organized response, but the disordered, high-register sounds of people who have just lost the person they depended on. Now, Holloway said, he was already moving. The tactical reality of a decapitated command structure and ambush force that has been operating under centralized direction suddenly deprived of that direction is that the individual elements do not immediately know what to do. They are capable. They have weapons, but they are accustomed to receiving instruction before acting, and in the first 30 to 90 seconds after the command element is removed, there is a window not of safety, but of initiative. Holloway took the initiative. He moved from the pillar position to the base of the residential stack stairway in 4 seconds of controlled advance, drawing one burst from the north walkway that went high and left because the shooter was firing without a directed firing solution, firing because he heard movement rather than because he had a target acquisition. Reese moved parallel, cutting right, using the stacked transport pallets as intermediate cover. Shields and Harwick moved together, angling for the western approach, not to exit through it, but to present a threat to the shooters covering it, forcing them to choose between responding to the western approach and watching the center. The first 3 minutes were what NavSpecWar training described as a violent transition of initiative, a series of rapid, aggressive movements designed not to achieve any single tactical objective, but to destroy the ambush's coherence before the enemy could reconstitute command. It was not elegant. It was loud and fast and consumed ammunition at a rate that Holloway was tracking in the back of his mind with the automatic accountancy of someone who has been doing this for 12 years. The east walkway, the position's pale echo had reported as empty, confirmed by Reese's earlier reconnaissance, gave them the angle. Pruitt, managing Aldridge between them, moved through the east corridor as Holloway and Reese cleared the lower walkway access stairs. The remaining 8 or 9 enemy personnel, distributed across the upper walkways, and without coordinated direction, attempted to regroup toward the command position at Delta 1, and found that the space they were regrouping through was now contested. The ambush lasted 23 minutes from the shot to the last contact. 4 enemy personnel were killed. 3 were captured, disarmed, secured, and left with enough water to remain viable for the 8 to 12 hours it would take any response force to locate them. The remaining 3 or 4 scattered into the deeper dome system and were not pursued. Holloway's team found Dr. Felix Wren in a modified residential module at grid position Echo 3 in Dome 6, exactly where the original intelligence had said he would be. The modification to the module consisted of a communications array, a workstation, and a sleeping arrangement that suggested Wren had been there for at least 2 weeks. He was alive. He was frightened. He was, when he understood what was happening, so visibly and completely relieved that he did not ask any questions until they were already moving toward the extraction point. The extraction used the surface access shaft that Pale Echo had found during her 16 hours of preparation, not the shaft Holloway's team had descended, but a secondary point in the dome system's original emergency egress plan, one that emerged 200 meters from the insertion zone and allowed them to avoid the compromised primary shaft. Aldridge made it to the surface without assistance for the last 40 meters. He said nothing about this, and nobody said anything to him about it, which was the appropriate response. The extraction window closed with 19 minutes remaining. They went back in at 0914 hours. 4 hours after the extraction, a different team, 3 personnel from the immediate support element, plus Holloway, who had told the extraction control officer that he was going back in and had not presented it as a question. They found the freight elevator platform. They found the bipod marks on the corroded metal surface, 2 precise depressions where the bipod's feet had been positioned, the metal around them free of the fine mineral dust that coated everything else, disturbed by the rifle's mass. They found the platform's oscillation, still running on its 1.3-second cycle, the cables groaning faintly in the dome's air. They found the brass 1.50 BMG casing, standing upright against the platform's railing, as if it had been placed there deliberately rather than ejected by the rifle's action. It was possible, Holloway thought, that the ejected case had simply struck the railing and come to rest in that position by chance. It was possible. He picked it up. It was still faintly warm. There was no other evidence that anyone had been on the platform. No other equipment, no waste, no food packaging, nothing that indicated a 16-hour vigil in a cold underground space except the bipod marks and the brass. The radio trace on 143.625 MHz showed no activity, not static, not interference. Clean silence, as if the channel had never been used. The secondary access shaft, the one they had used for extraction, had been closed from the inside with a manually operated collapse mechanism, which was a feature of the dome system's original emergency design. The mechanism required a key specific to the shaft's lock assembly, and the lock assembly was on the inside of the shaft. Whoever had triggered the collapse was still inside when they did it, or had exited through a point Holloway had not located. He held the brass casing in his glove, and looked at the bipod marks and said nothing for a while. Reese had come back in with him. Reese was looking at the same marks, the same railing, the same air. She could have come out with us, Reese said. She could have. Why didn't she? Holloway thought about the transmission. The specific flat professional calm of a person spending zero cognitive resources on anything except the task at hand. The economy of the communication, not cold, exactly, but precise, calibrated to exactly what needed to be said and not a word more. She had another reason for being here, he said. Reese said nothing. The mission we were running, Dr. Wren, she knew about it, but she was here before it. 16 hours before it. Whatever brought her here didn't require us to know about it, and it didn't go away when we left. So she's still down here, or she finished, and she's somewhere else. Holloway closed his hand around the brass casing. The warmth was almost gone now. Either way, she made a choice. He put the casing in his chest pocket, where it would stay through the debrief, through the after-action report, through the 2 weeks of processing and documentation that followed the Valehaven operation, through the formal investigation into how the team had been compromised, through the intelligence assessment of the enemy command structure they had dismantled. Through all of it, nobody could formally verify the existence of Sergeant First Class Lenora Vass discharged, records archived, operating under no current mandate or contract, or connect her to a call sign that did not appear in any directory, database, or operational record. There was a shot. The shot had a point of origin. The point of origin had bipod marks and one spent casing. That was all. The after-action report that Holloway filed used 12 pages to describe the Valehaven operation. The first 11 pages were factual, sequential, and written in the clipped institutional language of a man who had been filling out these forms for 12 years. The 12th page was the section labeled Additional Observations, which was technically optional and was rarely used for anything beyond administrative notes. In the Additional Observations section of the Valehaven after-action report, Chief Petty Officer Garrett Holloway wrote one paragraph. The paragraph read, "At 0312 hours, fire support was received from an unidentified asset operating on legacy emergency frequency 143.625 MHz, call sign Pale Echo. The asset's firing position has been located and documented." The asset has not been located. The shot taken by this asset to neutralize the enemy command element at Grid Delta 1 represents a level of marksmanship for which I do not have an adequate technical description, given the environmental conditions, distance, and lack of technological support. I have no recommendation regarding this asset because I have no basis on which to make one. I have only the following observation. There are people who do not need to be believed in order to be right. The record should reflect that we were wrong not to believe immediately, and that the cost of our hesitation was 4.5 minutes of additional fire we could not afford. We got lucky. We should not have needed luck. The report was classified at the secret level. It was reviewed by 4 officers and filed in the operational records of Naval Special Warfare Command. It was not read by Lenora Vass, who did not read classified reports. She read the snow, if anything. She read wind and distance and the specific geometry of spaces that had been designed for one purpose and repurposed by physics and time into something entirely different. She read the things that could not be taught and therefore could not be verified and therefore, according to certain institutional frameworks, did not officially exist. She kept moving. She always had, somewhere in the dome system or somewhere above it, or somewhere far beyond it. In a different city with different geometry and different air and a different impossible distance, there was another platform, another bipod position, another window that would open for 0.2 seconds and close again. She would find it. She always had.